His name was Cyril Radcliffe. He was a British lawyer. He had never been to India. He arrived on July 8, 1947, with 5 weeks to divide the Indian subcontinent into 2 countries. He had never drawn a border before. He barely knew where Bengal and Punjab were, the 2 provinces he was tasked with splitting. He worked from old census maps and outdated district records in an air-conditioned office in New Delhi while the subcontinent outside burned with the communal violence that had already been building for months. On August 17, 1947, 2 days after Indian independence, 3 days after Pakistan's, the line he had drawn was published. 14 million people discovered they were on the wrong side of it. Between 200,000 and 2 million of them died in the violence that followed. Cyril Radcliffe left India the day after he submitted his maps. He burned all his papers from the commission. He refused the fee he was offered. He never returned. Shortly before his death in 1977, he told a journalist, "I suspect they'd shoot me out of hand, both sides." He was right. Britain had governed India for nearly 2 centuries. It left in 5 weeks. The speed of the departure was not inevitable. In early 1947, the British government had announced that India would be granted independence by June 1948, a timeline that was already compressed relative to the scale of what was being organized, but that at least provided more than a year to manage the transition. In June 1947, Lord Louis Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, who had arrived only 4 months earlier, moved the date forward. Independence would come in August 1947. 11 weeks away. The reasons for the acceleration have been debated by historians since. Mountbatten's defenders argue that the communal violence already spreading across the subcontinent made a faster transfer preferable to a longer period of uncertain British authority. His critics argue that the acceleration compressed the time available for managing the transition to the point where catastrophic failure was nearly inevitable. What the acceleration produced was a 5-week timeline for drawing the border. The decision to partition India into a Hindu-majority state and a Muslim-majority state, rather than transferring power to a unified India, had emerged from the political dynamics of the independence movement itself. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, leader of the Muslim League, had pressed for a separate Muslim state. The Indian National Congress, led by Nehru, had ultimately accepted partition as preferable to an extended political deadlock. The decision to partition was political. The decision about where the border would go was technical. Both were made by people who had been in the same building for weeks. Cyril Radcliffe was appointed in July 1947 to chair the Boundary Commission that would draw the lines through Punjab in the west and Bengal in the east. He arrived in India on July 8. He had no prior experience with the subcontinent, no relationships with its communities, no knowledge of the specific local geographies, the rivers, the roads, the irrigation systems, the specific patterns of settlement that determined which communities lived where. He had maps. He had census data. He had 5 weeks. He later said that 2 to 3 years would have been a more realistic timeline. He said it 24 years after the fact. The specific decisions Radcliffe made while drawing the line were not made in isolation. He received input from British officials and from representatives of the communities being divided, but the final determinations were his. The specific decision that has attracted the most historical attention was the allocation of Lahore. Lahore was one of the most important cities of the Punjab, culturally, economically, and symbolically. Both the new Pakistan and the new India had claims on it. In Radcliffe's initial drafts, Lahore went to India. Then, reportedly at the suggestion of an assistant who pointed out that Pakistan would have no major city without it, Lahore was reallocated to Pakistan. The reallocation was made as an adjustment to an initial draft. One of the most consequential urban decisions in 20th century South Asian history was made as an afterthought. The border Radcliffe drew split villages in half, cut farmers off from their fields, divided families, and separated communities from the infrastructure they depended on. In some places, a single road ended up in 2 different countries. When the line was published on August 17, 2 days after India's independence, 3 days after Pakistan's, no one on either side had known for certain where it would fall until it was announced. People who went to sleep on August 16 as residents of one country woke up on August 17 as residents of another. If this history is new to you, subscribe to Unsolved East and hit like. New episodes every week. The violence that followed the announcement of the Radcliffe Line was not a surprise to everyone. Gandhi had warned that partition would produce communal violence. British officials on the ground had been reporting for months that tensions in Punjab and Bengal were approaching a breaking point. The violence had, in fact, already begun before the border was announced. Communal massacres between Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh communities had been occurring in Punjab and Bengal through the spring and summer of 1947. What the announcement of the border produced was the specific trigger that converted localized communal violence into mass population movement and mass killing on a scale that no one had fully prepared for. Across Punjab and Bengal, communities that had coexisted for almost a millennium attacked each other in a terrifying outbreak of sectarian violence, Hindus and Sikhs on one side, Muslims on the other. Massacres, arson, forced conversions, mass abductions, and savage sexual violence erupted on both sides of the new border. The trains became the defining image. Trains carrying refugees across the new border arrived at their destinations full of corpses. Passengers had been killed en route, by mobs that stopped trains, by armed groups on either side of the border, by the specific chaos of a population movement of 14 million people without adequate protection. The specific character of the violence, the mutual nature of it, with atrocities committed by all communities against all communities, has complicated the historical memory of partition in ways that distinguish it from the other cases this channel has covered. This was not a state perpetrating violence against a minority. This was communities that had lived as neighbors for centuries turning on each other with a ferocity that the specific context of partition had unleashed. The violence against women was systematic and took forms specific to the communal nature of the conflict. In the Sikh village of Thoa Khalsa, when the men of the village found themselves surrounded and believed their women would be captured, 90 women drowned themselves in the village well rather than face what they believed would happen to them. A doctor in Shaikapura shot 50 to 60 women of his own family to protect them from capture. A patriarch in Quetta beheaded 13 family members, including his daughters. These were not isolated incidents. They reflected a specific logic of the partition violence, the killing of women by their own families to prevent their capture and conversion by the opposing religious community, that has been documented extensively by historians who have interviewed survivors across the decades since 1947. An estimated 75,000 women were abducted or raped during the partition violence. Many were never returned to their families. The death toll has never been precisely established. British estimates, which historians have generally regarded as conservative, place the death toll at approximately 200,000. Most historians accept a figure closer to 500,000 to 1 million. Some estimates range as high as 2 million. British soldiers in India during the partition were ordered to protect British lives. They were not ordered to intervene in the communal violence. By the specific decision of Mountbatten and the British Military Command, the British Army, which was still present in significant numbers in India during August 1947, did not deploy to prevent the massacres occurring along the border. The British soldiers who watched the violence and could not intervene, or were not permitted to, have given accounts across the decades since that describe the specific experience of watching people being killed while being ordered to do nothing. The image of British soldiers confined to their barracks while hundreds of thousands of people died on the roads outside has become, in the historical literature, one of the defining symbols of the moral character of British imperial withdrawal. The Radcliffe Line has never stopped producing consequences. The most immediate was Kashmir. The princely state of Kashmir, ruled by a Hindu Maharaja over a predominantly Muslim population, was not definitively allocated by the Radcliffe Commission. Its accession was left to the decision of its ruler, who chose India in October 1947 in exchange for military assistance against a Pakistani-backed invasion. Pakistan disputed the accession. India and Pakistan fought their first war over Kashmir in 1947 to 1948. They fought again in 1965. They fought again in 1971. They fought again in 1999. Kashmir remains divided between Indian-administered territory and Pakistani-administered territory along a line of control that has never been converted into a formal international border. It is one of the most heavily militarized regions on Earth. Tens of thousands of people have died in Kashmir-related violence since 1947. In 1998, both India and Pakistan conducted nuclear weapons tests. Two countries that share a border drawn in 5 weeks by a man who had never been to India now both possess nuclear arsenals pointed at each other across that border. The specific families separated by the partition, people whose homes ended up in one country while their relatives ended up in another, experienced the separation differently depending on when, where, and how the border hardened around them. Some were reunited within months. Some spent decades unable to cross. In 2007, India and Pakistan opened the Wagatari border crossing for limited civilian use, allowing some separated families to meet for the first time in 60 years. The crossing remains one of the most restricted in the world. The people who were separated as adults in 1947 are now in their 90s and hundreds. Time is running out. Cyril Radcliffe burned all his papers from the commission after submitting his maps. He accepted no payment for the work. He left India on August 17, the day the line was published, and never returned. He spent the rest of his career in British law, becoming a law lord and later a viscount. He was appointed to distinguished positions in British public life. He lived until 1977. The journalist Kuldip Nair, who met Radcliffe at his London home before his death, recorded that Radcliffe said he had no regrets at the time of partition, but that he was sorry that 1 million lives were lost due to the line. 1 million. His lower estimate. He drew the line that killed them in 5 weeks. He never had to live with the line he drew. The line Cyril Radcliffe drew in 5 weeks is still there. It runs for approximately 3,300 kilometers across the subcontinent, from the Arabian Sea in the west to the Bay of Bengal in the east, splitting Punjab and Bengal and generating the specific geographical realities that have structured South Asian politics, conflict, and human suffering for nearly 80 years. 14 million people crossed it in 1947. Between 200,000 and 2 million died. The land on both sides looks the same. The same soil. The same rivers. The same crops. The same villages, in some cases literally the same villages, split by a line that runs through their fields and their streets and sometimes through their houses. Radcliffe burned his papers. He refused his fee. He never came back. The people who live on the line did not have those options. They were born on one side or the other, or in the case of the families that were divided, on both sides simultaneously, and they have been living with the line ever since. The descendants of partition on both sides of the border carry family histories of displacement, of relatives who went one way while others went another, of villages abandoned and properties lost and connections severed that in some cases have never been restored. The line was drawn in 5 weeks. It has been bleeding for nearly 80 years. Radcliffe said, "I suspect they'd shoot me out of hand, both sides." He was right. He died in his bed in 1977. The line is still there.